Good morning. Thanks, Tyson. Good morning to some and good afternoon to others. Thanks for joining us for the first of our 3 destination marketing webinars, Search Powering Your Marketing Mix. I'm Mike Rosenberg, Vice President of New Business and Strategy at EngineWorks. We're a full-service search marketing agency focused on the travel and hospitality industry. So my goal today is to show you how to use search marketing research really to drive all of your marketing efforts. This session promises to provide a strategy backbone that can be implemented by destinations of all different sizes to enhance your marketing efforts. From research to strategy and planning, this hopefully informative and actionable presentation is going to provide a roadmap, and we'll have some case studies along the way as well. As a reminder, as I mentioned, it is the first of 3. The next 2 are specifically focusing in on social media and can it deliver to your bottom line, where we'll address how to go about tracking your social media efforts to see if all the work is paying off. That'll be our April presentation, and then in May we'll go even more interactive than we are today and have live SEO assessments. We'll take a couple of quote-unquote pre-seeded assessments from ahead of time, and then we'll take a few that are also live from the attendees during the webinar. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely reach out and let me know if you want to be one of those pre-seeded ones. So let's get going. Search powering your marketing mix. Knowledge is power. So really the impetus of this presentation is that for a long time, really since the beginning of advertising and marketing, companies have spent a lot of money, a lot of time on the creation of their marketing mix. And traditionally, this has been a top-down strategy. You know, messages were created to tout the attributes or the benefits of a company's product or services, or in this case, a destination's attractions or features or the cities within it. You know, followed that by integration of that messaging into each channel of the marketing mix. Then do some conventional marketing research to see if it was effective, kind of going into the old adage of 50% of my marketing works, I just don't know which 50%. Well, unfortunately, this process often failed to hit the mark. You know, the in-depth research and analysis of consumer action, coupled with what we now have as instantaneous or at least close to instantaneous ROI tracking and measurement, can help us use that knowledge gained through some of these search marketing and online marketing tools as a foundation to actually create your marketing mix. So what we'd like to look at here is not just viewing search marketing or even online marketing as, you know, a channel within the mix, but rather we can feed that traditionally created messaging that we feed into the marketing mix, but rather using that to extract knowledge to create that overall marketing campaign. Kind of a roadmap of what we're going to cover. The 4 main points today are going to be research and analysis, how customers seek out destinations, just how we can discover the best targeting and messaging, and then kind of how to integrate all of it into your various media channels. You know, through this process, we can really extract some precise behavioral information pertaining to exactly who's searching for specific destinations, information on those, what it is that they're looking for, which messages resonate with them, and what factors entice them to become visitors or customers. And armed with this, you can create targeting and messaging to really drive that consumer action, both on and offline. So one thing to note here is I definitely used bullets, not a list 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll really weave through these 4 pieces throughout the entire presentation. And as I mentioned, we'll use some examples along the way as well, some case studies. So what does this look like? Well, we like to, successful digital marketing focuses first on 3 areas for success. You've got your content. So what content does your customer desire? And that's really going to be the second half of this presentation, focusing on content and where that lies. The other 2 pieces that we'll look at is search and social. You know, search really addresses, you know, what content you should be focused on, and then social is going to ensure that content is hitting its mark and is created in the right context, and of course is in the right places that we're sharing that content and putting it out there. So really to know where to begin with these three, we have to see how people actually act and function online, which again is kind of the opposite of what has been done in the past, where we kind of throw something up and hope that it sticks. So to start with the search side of it, really the foundation of search is that keyword research. The foundation of search marketing is finding out the right keywords to go after. So going through this search intelligence, this keyword research, is one of the first steps to coming up with this digital plan for success. So the first thing you have to do, which many of you probably already have, is you go through and you kind of have that seed list. You either select and mine your site, or go off of the list that you currently have, or do a big brainstorm with marketing and other folks that understand the purpose of your online presence. For us, this process is very integrated with the clients that we're working with to define the goals of the engagement. Where are we trying to focus on? Take a look at the current list that we're going after. Maybe take a look at mining from your site or your competitors' sites. And then doing a lot of research and kind of expanding this list and finding all the different variations that you could go after, expanding it, and then coming back down and selecting it and putting those into buckets of information. When we're doing this, there's three main things that you want to look at. Now, of course, there's the popularity, search popularity. That's volume. That's one where you can say, okay, does it make sense? Are people actually searching this way? The second one is that relevancy. You have to balance those. It may seem very, very relevant, but if people aren't searching that way, and this is something that we'll talk about in a few slides about how to determine how people are searching, and they may not search the way that you search because they're from a different part of the country or something like that. But going through and extracting the top performing search terms is going to help you gain this valuable behavior data and targeting. So making sure that there's actually volume there, that it's relevant, and then it's in the right competitive landscape. As a destination, your destination plus hotel, or even hotel in general, may seem very relevant. I'm sure there's a ton of search volume of popularity, but it may not be in the right competitive space. So really balancing those three pieces are key to starting to hone in on what you should be going after. And the other thing is, it's not only what people are searching for, but what's actually converting now. Assuming that analytics are in place now, that's a great place to dive into and see what's driving traffic now, and we'll focus on that in a case study as well, where you can get some really good insight as well. During this process, you also want to kind of take a step back and define what a conversion is. With a resort or something like that, a conversion tends to be very easy to define. It's a reservation, it's a booking, it's someone coming to the resort and booking a trip. With the DMO, sometimes it's a little bit harder. There's several. What's the job of a destination marketing organization? It's to get people there probably, or some folks have booking engines. If you have one, is that the best place for someone to book? Oftentimes, your partners are going to have booking engines that are maybe more user-friendly or easier to use. So is it an exposure piece, or traffic to the site, or a visitor guide request? Of course, all of that's going to go into what you're going to focus on and where you should be. I like to put up this visual representation just sort of to give a very simple view of what it is we're trying to do. When we're talking about volume versus competitiveness versus relevancy. On the top of this, you've got lots of volume. On the bottom, you have a lot less volume, but probably a much higher conversion rate. So really balancing where you need to be on that is pretty crucial to success. Another big piece of it is going to be competitive intelligence, or competitive analysis. And when we're looking at that, on the search side specifically, you have two main types of competitors, and this will go across social and as we get into content as well. But you have what you identify as your direct competitors. That's the destination down the highway, or the folks that you're competing for that vacation dollar for, or whatnot. And so seeing where they are in the search engines, what they're doing in social media, sort of what their plans are, can be very intuitive and help you come up with this plan. The other type of competitor that we always like to look at is, we call them landscape competitors, whether that's search landscape or social landscape. And those are the folks who are, in search are showing up, whether they're your direct competitors or not. They may be partners. A TripAdvisor is one that comes up off top of mind for destinations that will often come up for the search terms that we want to go after. Or maybe your members or your partners who are, the hotels in the area, the resorts in the area. Those folks. And what are they doing? Why are they there? What's been successful for them? A tactic at this level is inbound links. That really helps ranking. So where are the inbound links coming from? Is that an opportunity for you to go out and form a partnership with those folks or go after those same links? What are they doing in social media? For your marketing insight, you're probably going to want to look closer at those direct competitors, those sort of like organizations, and get some insight on what they're doing right. I would say go sign up for their newsletters and see what you get. Request a brochure. Go through their booking process. Dive into your competition, especially the ones who are doing well, to see what's going on there. It's a pretty straightforward process, but what it's going to do when you do it the right way also is you're going to end up with clusters of information, buckets of information based on maybe your attractions within a destination or the types of people who visit your location or who want to come and do things in your area. So you'll have those, and then you'll also start to see trends that other folks are seeing where you can take advantage of. So we're going to jump into our first couple sets of case studies. As you can see, we're talking about pop soda and Coke. As I mentioned a couple slides ago, where folks are in the country or the type of information that they're looking for really has a lot to show with how they search and how they consume information. And Tyson Braun, who is an account strategist with us, is going to touch on that as well as go through a case study for a client that he worked with, a CVB in Ohio in Warren County. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tyson and have him go over this slide and talk through the case study.
Okay. All right, thanks, Mike. Everyone has an answer to the following question. What do you call America's most popular drink? The one made from carbonated water, syrup, and artificial flavor. This chart breaks down each county in the United States by the term the majority of residents use when referring to that drink. The deeper colors signify a large majority. I'm from Chicago, so I only drink pop. I don't think in terms of soda, and I would never expect somebody to hand me a Sprite after I asked for a Coke. But in the yellow counties, people say soda, and the red, everything is a Coke. We all think our title is right, but being right is not what matters in search marketing. The right term is what is used by your target audience, and you should focus your search marketing campaign all around those terms. By knowing whether to use, for example, we have a lot of CVBs I know here, so whether to use event venues or meeting rooms, spa hotels or luxury resorts, or family fun instead of things to do with kids, it can make all the difference in reaching your online goals. So that's kind of a fun example of the variance in the words that people use. All right, and then example here is one of my favorite clients is the CVB for Warren County, Ohio. Warren County is pretty average in size and population. It's less than a quarter of people live there. But there's a lot to do in Warren County, and many people visit each year. Their biggest attraction is a huge theme park called Kings Island. It's home of the largest wooden roller coaster. Kings Island is so popular that most people, when they come to Warren County, are looking for information related to the park. There are hundreds of searches for terms like Kings Island vacation packages or Kings Island meeting rooms. And once we realized this, we changed our strategy to focus on these terms. From this, we were able to exceed this client's goals very quickly. Had we focused on what our clients assumed people searched, we probably would have ended up targeting terms like Warren County accommodations or Warren County special event venues, because that's the way we talk on the marketing side, familiar with what the CVB has to offer. If we did that, I don't think we would have reached our clients' goals as quickly as we did, if at all. Another thing that we learned is that many people look for things to do near Cincinnati, which makes sense because people visit the city for many reasons. Since Warren County fits the description of being near Cincinnati, we target those people and compel them to check out Warren County. For example, we give them lists of things to do, lists for couples, families, and antique hunters, and this really targets into exactly what they're trying to find. We get a lot of visitors to the website with this approach. And lastly, for Warren County, we learned that people visiting the area tended to engage in social media quite a bit. They tweet, they check in, they share pictures, and they blog about it all after they get home. Our team reads all of this content, and we continue to gain insights into how our people talk and use it to understand what they're trying to find. So yeah, that's Warren County. Mike?
Thanks, Tyson. You know, I think the biggest takeaways, you know, from those two examples is, you know, the volume piece on, you know, are people searching for events? Are they searching for venues? You know, and one of the things that we found in Warren County, and I'm sure everyone on the presentation has done their own research, and you know, one of the things that we found with them that was interesting is, you know, you've got your best practices, your SEO best practices, and we had best practices for DMOs, which for title tags, you know, and I think best practices for destinations is, you know, you list your destination first, followed by, you know, whatever it is that makes you stand out, or the content of that page, or, you know, what that is. But that's sort of the formula. You know, one sort of tidbit here is, depending on who you are, you know, you can break best practices. So for Warren County, for example, one of the things we found is they don't fit in that, because there's several Warren counties around, you know, and people aren't going to be necessarily searching for Warren County. So they're searching for the attractions that are there, the Kings Island, the places like that. So, you know, definitely look at best practices, and it's a good guideline. But when you're sort of getting into the tactics and the minutia of it all, make sure and sort of, you know, always go back to what you know and what makes sense to you. We'll touch on another case study before getting onto the second part of the presentation. This one has to do with a destination down in Georgia that's actually been a client of ours for quite some time. And really, when they came to us, all of their marketing, all of their messaging was really around gardens and butterflies. You know, and that's what they are. They're a beautiful garden. Lots of folks want to go there, and there's a lot of messaging involved with that. But as we kind of got into the research piece of it, as you can see on the left, the sort of gardens and butterflies and nature kind of keywords, which is what they were targeting, had some volume. But as we kind of expanded that into our research, and obviously this is a very precise look at this, but there's a lot more volume for things like golf and weddings and conferences and you know, event type things, venues. And once we were able to discover that not only there was, you know, 4 times the volume here if we're looking at this set, but once we implemented that, we also had about 3 times the conversion rate. You know, that's the type of information that people are looking for. And once we're able to do that online and share that information and start to show the impact online, then that starts to go into every piece of the marketing that they're doing. And this is just sort of a basic example of what their messaging kind of looked like before this insight and information, and then sort of evolving into really focusing on those 3 themes or those 3 clusters of information that really were driving the bulk of their reservations and the bulk of their bookings. And this didn't only go for their search or even only just online, but they started adding this into every part of their marketing mix, into email, into print, into outdoor and regional television. So you can really weave it throughout your whole campaign. Although as I go down that road, I also kind of come back a little bit. You know, yes, weave it into your social media, which they did as well. You know, as you can see in that top tweet there, talking about the golf course, and you know, that's kind of another presentation on, you know, what sort of information should be shared via social media. I was glad that this screenshot had something about golf, since that was in there, and you know, that's the type of information people want from Callaway. Is, you know, what's, I think it's step meters, are the greens running, you know, is there a frost delay, sort of that kind of information, and what's the weather like. You know, one kind of note also is we talked about, you know, the volume that the garden and butterfly folks had, which wasn't nearly as large as the wedding and golf type folks. But those are your core audience. So no matter what you do, you got to make sure and stick with them. I think that this was some good insight, and actually, again, kind of preview for the next presentation. One of the terms that actually Tyson coined that I really like is, you know, your social media folks are like a marketing army, and especially those enthusiasts. So make sure that you're still covering them we'll talk about kind of content demand and content balance here shortly, but making sure that you're still covering those enthusiasts is very important as well. So just, kind of I always like to provide takeaways of tools that will kind of help you do this information. At a minimum, Google AdWords is a keyword research tool. There's quite a few other out there. It's kind of whichever one that you like, whether it's Keyword Tracker or Keyword Discovery, or there's a bunch of paid tools out there. Google AdWords is a great place to start. Google itself, Google Instant, will give you a lot of guidance to sort of start that process. Or to hone in on it. With AdWords, you're going to get some idea on the competitiveness of the keyword. You're going to get an idea of the volume, as well as some seasonality information. You could also get into insights. Google Wonder Wheel is another one to if you're trying to branch out and get that list big before you bring it back. A couple of social media research tools. There's the channels themselves. There's Facebook and Twitter. And, Twitter search is a good one, as well as sites like Technorati. And then, if you have the budget and the want and the need, you can go up to some of the listening software tools like the Radian6, or on the expensive side, or Raven Tools, something like that on the less expensive side. So as we kind of talked about the search data side and pointed out a few tools for the social intelligence and listening side. Once you have those two pieces and add those together, really now what we're moving into is this content marketing game. So if you can't tie all these efforts together, and that's online, offline, social, basically you're not going to be able to do as well. And really what it comes down to is the quality of the content and discovering where that demand is. So as we review that, the search and social data is going to identify that customer vernacular. It's going to help you understand the meaning of the inquiries that are coming in and prioritize that content based on the demand that search and that social intelligence is going to tell us. Help us package it up for consumption and plan for the future. And really what that does is that takes us into why content is so important. And just some statistics, some sort of random content statistics. Basically what this is saying is there's a lot of it there. There's a lot of it being produced every single day. And a big reason for that is it's easy to do. The barrier for entry is really low. It's getting lower every day. Web 2.0 or whatever, we're calling it these days, it's been around for a while. And it's that user-generated content that's so easy to produce, whether it's in social media or, you can set up a blog in minutes and start contributing. And while that's wonderful, of course there's some drawbacks. The pros of this is that low barrier entry. It's very cost effective. It's easy to do. There's speedy distribution. You can get it out there fast. It's trackable, and lots of people want to consume it. Now the cons, really, there's lots of noise. There's a lot, and a lot. We looked at the last slide. There's a ton of content being put out there, and it's not all targeted. The quality is not necessarily always there. With the amount that's being created, that noise, it's hard for folks to sift through that information. Most of this content that's being put out is never being found, much less consumed. And kind of what's the point in that? So that's where we're having a strategy and really doing the research and seeing what the demand is key. So what do people want? Why is it out there? Well, the public, your consumers, the folks that you're going after, what do they want in content? Well, they want to get their questions answered. They want to be able to document their experiences. Of course, they want to share. It's social media, right? They want to build relationships and expand that knowledge base, learn something, figure out where they should go and what they should do. As marketers, what do we need to do? Well, with that content, we need to build value. We need to build our brand, and then ultimately it comes to we want to be able to convert something. We need to be able to put an ROI on it. So with search, what are we trying to do? Well, we want noteworthy content that produces links, that helps with our rankings and helps get people to our site and is visible so it can be indexed. With our user experience, well, we want actionable, something that induces that desired action, content that's useful and usable. And then as content strategists, of course, it's that quality piece, that useful and usable, and they're all important. But what it really comes down to is what's relevant. Does the content meet the demand of connecting the public's interest with answers to the questions that they have? And that's the type of stuff that's going to rise to the top and be visible and noteworthy. I think for a long time, I'm sure everybody's heard the term, content is king. You may have heard content is king, but relevant content rules, and that's really where obviously things are moving now. Is you can't just put it out there; it's got to be meeting that demand. So it's a lot of stuff, and I think the next question is, where do you start? And again, now we've got a graphic that has a lot of things on it, but we've covered the first three of these really in the beginning of the first half of this presentation. I think the other point I want to make also is, I guess, kind of unfortunately, all that old research that you did that I started the presentation talking about, it definitely is valuable. We don't believe that it's not useful. It certainly is. That's sort of the first step is going through all of that information and making sure that we understand that it's there. Unfortunately, kind of unfortunately for everybody, it's another layer. We're putting another level of social and search intelligence and competitive intelligence on top of it. The nice part about it is typically it's a lot easier to get. We're not talking about a focus group where we have to get a bunch of people together in a room and feed them and give them swag and look through the one-way, or I never know if it's one-way or two-way, but the one-way mirror to see what their reactions are. Focus groups are a lot easier when you have inherent focus groups online like Facebook and Twitter and Google. So it's looking there, and it's much more real time. But again, we want to look at what those search and social content demand looks like, and that competitive analysis, intelligence. What's your competition doing? Of course, we're going to look at tactically what they're doing, which we touched on a little bit, but more importantly, what's their approach as we get into this content demand question? What are they doing to answer that question? Or maybe more importantly, what aren't they doing? Where's the opportunity for you to dominate? And then, of course, you have to audit everything. One of the most valuable assets that you have as an organization is kind of that earned and owned media that you have. We're certainly not saying that you want to drop your offline and your mass media advertising, because that's what's going to be creating this demand that that we're picking up and that is earned and owned. But there certainly is that demand that's already out there, for your destinations, and we need to make sure that we're capturing that piece first, or if not capturing it first, at least capturing it at the same time as the demand that we're trying to create. I like the analogy of it's like a shoe store that's put all of its marketing efforts into getting people to drive over to their location for the sale or the special offer or whatever it is, but they're missing the guy who's got a hole in his shoe walking down the street, because you can't find them because they're not giving that demand that's already there. We're here, make sure that you capture that's already out there. The person who's in the store who's getting ignored because the salesperson's on the phone trying to get that next customer in the door. So once we kind of do those audits, from here we have to create that strategy based on the opportunity that we're seeing through auditing our website, through our social media, our analytics audit, seeing where the opportunity is, so seeing where you can put your money. That's one of the things we hear, all the time, is we can do all these things, but what's going to be most effective? What's going to have the impact, kind of the fastest? Where can we be most efficient? And going through this process is really what's going to help you do that. So again, it's all about understanding that content demand and planning around it. Auditing, what do you currently have? What don't you have? What types of content do your customers want? What do they demand? And analyzing that. Where are they already? Where are they consuming it? What's missing? How do you fill that gap? Where are you out of balance? And then from there, you can look at improving results. Content can have an impact on the results of other things. Of course, there's, we talked about more search traffic, being relevant and creating links and driving that content to the top of search pages. There's increased consumption. People are knowing about your destination and want to travel there. The potential for it to become viral. And then, of course, eventually there's conversions. And then the question is where are those conversions taking place and making sure that you have a better chance of being found and being relevant. So again, let's dive into another couple case studies to kind of illustrate this. This is a good example. We started with a deep dive into search demand with Arizona, everything Arizona, trying to take into account what is it that's really driving what people want to know about this destination. And really what we found here was the #1 demanded information was around the Grand Canyon by far, followed that by Sedona, and then some of the cities, Phoenix, Tucson, et cetera, and then, of course, activities associated with these attractions in these cities, things like information about hiking in the Grand Canyon or where to eat in Sedona. So once, and that's a simplistic look at it, but once we went through that whole process, the next step was to audit their current content. And basically, as we audited everything, we found that it was definitely out of balance with the demand. When we mapped out to rearrange the current content based on that demand that we saw that they lacked sufficient information in a bunch of areas. It's specifically, when it was time to create new content or when the plan to create new content came in, let's focus that content on the Grand Canyon for the first round. Based on the research, round 2, let's focus on Grand Canyon again. Maybe even round 3, and then we go to Sedona and kind of move from there. So get that demand in balance with what you currently have. Another thing that we found during this process was, not surprisingly, and we touched on this with Callaway Gardens a little bit, was there's a ton of interest in pictures. I'm sure everybody's heard, how image search in Google is huge, in its own, in addition to text result searches. But we found there's a lot of interest in pictures. So how do you sort of solve that when they didn't have a ton of content, of inventory of pictures? Well, that's where you start creating photo contests to get that content. You can create a ton of content that the customers demand by doing that. User-generated content is great. Another client of ours, Asia Trans-Pacific Journeys, which is a travel and tour operator, they did a very, very good job of identifying, okay, people want to consume photos of these destinations, and of course when they're making their decisions on, to go to India or to go to Asia, what is it that we want to do is we want to see images of it. So again, let's do photo contests, and they've been able to create a ton of content that they have the rights to use based on entering in the contest, and them being granted those rights by the users who produce them, and beautiful imagery that rivals National Geographic in the scope and having these contests, and that sort of brings up again something that we'll focus on in the next webinar of then what do you do with this? What do you do with this social media content? With them, does it reside on Flickr, or should it be on your website, or do you have it live in Facebook? It kind of gets into this content repository and archives, and really where should this stuff live, which is another thing that you should be thinking about, especially as you're pulling in content to your website from other places. What's the place that it actually lives, and where is it repurposed, and how do you do that? But so back to Arizona. Once we sort of took this information that we had about what people are looking for, they want imagery, they want things to do in these locations. We took a look at, for example, what they were doing in their banner campaigns, their online banner campaigns, and they had some really great-looking, emotional, kind of emotional feel, flash and video ads. They looked really great. I think it was a guy who is kind of in a relaxing state, sort of a Zen state, sitting cross-legged. Kind of getting that emotional feel, but it was performing very, very badly. Nobody clicked on it, basically. With them, a conversion was, you had to click on the ad and then downloading or requesting more information or a visitor's guide. So once we looked at that and looked at our research, we found that, it looked cool, but it wasn't connecting with the information that people wanted. People wanted information about mountain biking, in Grand Canyon, or camping in Sedona. So we made some much more basic, simple ads with a lot of images that we saw people wanted, and from there we saw the metrics shoot through the roof. And I think they were getting your typical sort of standard 0.2% click-through rate kind of thing with the fancy ads, and we saw that 4x. And then really the value here is we saw that conversion rate, that visitor's guide information at 30%, which is huge. It gives you an idea of, that you're giving people what they're looking for. And really, the evidence was it wasn't just about search. It wasn't just about online. It was about everything, and that's definitely evidenced by that they changed their marketing mix. And many of you have probably seen the reports where they've moved a huge portion of their budget online from 15 to 20% in the past to now 30 to 40%. I'm sure a lot of folks have seen that Montreal, that example where they went 100% online. Again, that's based on what statistics are telling you and where you can be most effective with your dollars and with your marketing budgets. So we'll go from one extreme to the other. Go from a huge DMO in the state of Arizona to a much smaller scale. This one gives us some good insight into a couple of these avenues that we're talking about. And this is the city of Bothell, and for folks who don't know, it's a suburb of Seattle. And as we began this engagement with this client, search and social intelligence really played a key role. Starting on a very basic, kind of obvious level, when we did the research, we found that there's a lot more search volume for terms like Seattle area hotels or cheap hotels near Seattle than there are for hotels in Bothell. Very obvious, but it seems that there's a lot more volume there, and we're going to have kind of casting a much wider net. Well, knowing that, we had to develop a paid search campaign to focus on these terms. We didn't think, or we knew that the type of time and resource and assets we'd need to rake organically for a term like Seattle area hotels probably, or not probably, wasn't worth the time, energy, effort, and dollars we'd need to invest in doing that. But we can certainly have a very focused paid search campaign and create landing pages, of course, indexable landing pages for, if we can get some of that organic traffic, or if we want to focus on that in the future. But, creating specific pages for Seattle area hotels that didn't exist in the past. So we have somewhere to send folks when we're trying to capture that, maybe that budget traveler who doesn't mind being outside of the core of the city to save a few dollars. Another key finding that we found, when we were doing the initial research for this was, even though at the time they didn't really have much content around wine for this destination, it was driving visits to the site. It was driving conversions to the website that really didn't have much content around it. And a big reason for that was technically there aren't any wineries in Bothell. The city of Bothell doesn't have any wineries. Now, Chateau Ste. Michelle, along with many others, are right outside of Bothell in a neighboring community of Woodinville. So people were getting there, because it was near wine country. Well, Bothell didn't have any wineries, and Woodinville didn't have any hotels. Bothell has hotels. So, seeing that insight, that information led us to, okay, well, we really need to beef up the content that we have about wine and focusing about wine on the website. So, as you can see from that screenshot, we had a whole section, not a lot of sections, top-level navigation. One of those is wine. This is a screenshot from the homepage. You see, imagery around wine there as well, because it drives a lot of consumers, drives a lot of conversions for them. The other thing that this did was not only did it add a section to the website online, but really drove a very, very offline grassroots traditional marketing activity, which was creation of an event, an actual physical event in the community based around wine. We saw that how much success we were having online with wine type terms, getting folks in the community. The research helped us create these specific events that the city was hosting to bring folks in. And it started small with an event that was 300 people, which was only promoted online and through word of mouth and the wineries themselves, and that event sold out within the first day, actually, and had so much success that they did it again 6 months later and tripled the ticket price and tripled the number of tickets available, which sold out fast as well, and ended up kind of coming full circle and having the largest record numbers to their website in traffic, and also the largest number of folks going to their booking engine, which was a big conversion for them, is getting folks into the booking engine. So here we can see how that online really comes full circle and drives some offline advertising. So we're gonna wrap up with a final case study based on sort of in size-wise, one that's in the middle. Hopefully, there's a few weeks left in the ski season. I know that this image has kind of got me itching to get up one last time. But a Another great example of a DMO who's utilizing this online marketing to drive the strategy is Jackson Hole. A couple months ago in January, they let us know that they were starting to see these inquiries for summer booking travel to the area. And with them, like many DMOs, they're certainly more than an information bureau. They really act as a travel agency as well. So getting those folks in to start booking is key. Now, they came to us and mentioned things like wildlife tours are very popular in the area, but really they were unclear on how many folks were actually taking these kinds of activities, how many people were talking about them in the search engines. Is this actually resonating? Are people trying to get to us through this information? So to get to the bottom of this, and this is trying to give some tactical takeaways, to get to the bottom of it, we utilize historical paid search data. And basically, we analyze search query reports to see what keywords were capturing that traffic. Not just the ones that we were bidding on, but ones that we were actually converting. So then you take that and we map that out to site engagement in Google Analytics, really to figure out what keywords resulted in valuable visits to the site. So once we have that information, we were able to get a nice picture, not only about the types of words people were using to research the summer-related topics for them, but also see what engagement resulted from those. What were they consuming once they got on the site with those visits, and then determine whether that keyword drove a valuable, which are likely to convert traffic, and then that forms the viable SEO target or the strategy for the SEO side as we're moving into the summer season. So, basically this strategy, it gave us a chance to get a preview of site interaction down to the sort of the demand, the keyword level, and then structure the SEO campaign accordingly and see if there's any gaps in our content. The alternative to this would have been to make a guess, and here's what we think is going to happen based on the search queries and based on traffic estimates and what's happened in the past, and then spend those resources and time trying to affect those rankings and create that content based on guessing, as opposed to getting a little bit more insight into what's actually going on. So to wrap up, some takeaways from the process. Perform search-based keyword research. What you say, what your customers say, what your brand is, what your competitors' brands are. We've got products or services, but it looks like what your destinations are and what people think about those or the attractions that you have. Use social to understand the content inquiry or context. The sentiment, the type, the location of those conversations around those keywords, and to make sure and categorize and compare your keywords with the relevant demand that you're seeing. Audit the current content against that categorized demand. Recap a couple of the tools that we talked about. Your free, pretty basic tools, which go a long way. Google AdWords, Technorati is a great resource for social media. Twitter is a great resource. Google Analytics or whatever your analytics tool is, whether it's free or you're paying for it, there's a lot of great insight in there. And then, of course, there's ones that you can pay for. Again, whatever keyword research tool, either proprietary or paid for or second level that you want to use. Again, there's those listening tools, whether they're from the expensive encompassing side like Iridian 6 or a Spiral 16. There's lots of them out there. And again, we'll touch on and give more examples of tools in our next presentation, which is in May, about social media and can it deliver to your bottom line. And then before we take questions, we'll just note that we'll send out an email after this as well with a link to this. We're recording the presentation, so if you want to have it as a record or share, certainly feel free to do so. But with that, if you do have questions, please go ahead and ask them via the chat, the questions box, and then Tyson, I think you were going to go ahead and take those and moderate them for us. So please do ask away. And I think I'll go back to the good-looking slide as we're on hold here. We have okay. Well, it looks like we have one question. Oh, there's maybe a couple coming in. So, well, Tyson's having a hard time saying. Maybe I should go in there. Yes. Why didn't we? Looks like we kind of went beyond the title of. We went. Why did you go beyond the title of search, powering your marketing mix, and really go into content and social? And I guess not I guess really it's mostly because like any other entity, and you'll see this into the next webinars is EngineWorks is really a search marketing agency, and that's been our primary focus. But we're evolving, and actually we've become an entity called Ethology, and search marketing is certainly a major component of what we do. But research and intelligence is really what's going to drive the bus as we move forward. So more on that to come, but you'll see in the next webinar that will either be Ethology or be co-branded in it. But we wanted to present this as search, and even over the last few weeks as this presentation has been scheduled and come to fruition, everything's evolving, and it moves beyond just search. So it looks like that's about all the questions that we have. So I appreciate everyone's time coming on, and again, feel free to reach out to me directly with questions. We'll send an email out that has this information on it, and a link to where you can find the presentation. Again, feel free to reach out to me via Twitter or direct at mike@engineworks.com. And thanks for the time.